question there?
I did actually, and I don't know why my hand went up, but the question I had was, there is a verse in Genesis, and I can't remember where it is, I was just looking for it. It talks about something being passed down to generations. And
Yes.
So if there's a verse that would lead us to this original sin concept, can we talk about that for a moment? I don't want to interrupt you,
Yes.
allowing your teaching, but just so we can dispel it.
Well, there's a few different scriptures they try to use to prove it. Of course, the one you're talking about is God says that you visit the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and the fourth generation. Of course, but that does not teach Augustine's doctrine of original sin, because it's only to the third and fourth generation. Well, this says it goes to all mankind of all generations. See, but it doesn't say that they inherit anything. It says that it's being visited upon them. And it never says that it's being visited, as a punishment from God. But of course, like you said, as an effect, children, I believe it's talking genetically. When you are born of, say, an alcoholic father, and the sins of the father, there is a genetic thing that you might even inherit, a propensity towards alcoholism. So it's in your genes. And of course, then you also have the influence of your environment if you're born into that family. But he says that influence will only last for 2 to 3 generations. And eventually that, I guess, genetics fixes itself, and that influence, unless the children carry on that pattern. But at one point it stops to the 3rd and 4th generation. I guess sometimes the 3rd, sometimes the 4th, I guess it varies. But eventually it gets cut off. But you see the same thing. I mean, a child being born a drug baby. Now that baby is born with physical cravings for drugs. But is that child guilty of anything? No. Because it hasn't made any choices. It hasn't made any knowledgeable, intelligent choices yet. It's suffering as a victim because of the sins of the parent. It's not suffering as a criminal because the child hasn't chosen to be a drug addict. And so, and then you also have scriptures in Romans chapter 5. It says, through one man's disobedience, many were made sinners. Of course, you have to understand Augustine, when he was teaching this doctrine of original sin, he had no training, or he was not fluent at all in Greek, which is what that scripture was written in. He was reading from the Latin translation, which gave a different interpretation of Romans 5. It says, it says, because we all sinned in Adam. Where that scripture, it says in verse 12, where it says, so death passed upon all men, for that all have sinned, is what our English says, is what the Greek says, because all have sinned. In the Latin it says, death passed upon all men, because all men sinned in Adam. But if you go to that word make in the Greek, Augustine was interpreting that make as, like I said, an organic making. That God made us this. And so Adam is making us this. But that was not the Greek word they used, and they could have used a word like it. They had words like that in the Greek, of a physical, sort of organic making. But they didn't. They used the same word that they use when it talks about being, I think they use it over something like 200 and something times in the New Testament, that same word. And never is it used as a metaphysical making, or a corruption of your constitution. But that it's used when they talk about being appointed to a deacon. That word made is also translated and interpreted as appointed. So it means you're put in the place of. That somehow Adam has affected all men, that they are put in the place of sinners. That the result of his disobedience is that men are being put in the place of sinners. But that, again, does not mean physical, like Augustine would have taught. Neither does it teach any sort of involuntary position. Because if a person is being made a deacon, that includes their voluntary choice to meet the qualifications. If you're going to be a deacon, there's qualifications you need to meet. And once you make those choices to meet those qualifications, then you can be made a deacon. So the fact that it uses the word made does not at all imply that it's involuntary, or that it doesn't involve choices. In fact, the word that they chose to use in the Greek gives us a reason to believe the exact opposite. was that it does include your choices. That Adam has influenced all men. That, of course, I would say through his leading and his influence and his example, that all men are being influenced and appointed and made to be sinners, but not without their choices. Because if they wanted to make that argument, they chose the wrong word to use in the Greek. They had words that talked about being made, something in a metaphysical sense, but that's not the word that they used. So they have different scriptures that they'll use. They'll point to scriptures that say men are dead in their sins. But of course they're attaching on this connection that men are born that way, when it doesn't say that. Whereas it says men are dead in their sins. But that could be by choice just as easy as it is by birth. And so there's a lot of different scriptures that they try and use, but see, it's a connecting of the dots is what it is. It's not a very clear or explicit teaching of Scripture. It's a concept, an idea that a person has, and then they went to the Bible and the theological connecting of the dots, which were never meant to be connected at all. So, I mean, why is it wrong? It's wrong because it's not taught by the Scriptures. In fact, the Scriptures teach the opposite. It's wrong because it distorts our view of sin, and it distorts our view of human responsibility. It distorts our view of the judgment day. It distorts our view of the heart and character of God. It corrupts the whole Christian system, is what it does.